Welcome to the Success in Accounting podcast with me, Rob Brown, on behalf of the Accounting Influencers Podcast Network, one show going out every day of the week to 150 countries and 30,000 accountants and CPAs all over the world. We are thrilled to be finalizing our series of panels we're doing with authoritative, influential women leaders in the accounting and fintech world. And we have a stellar lineup of authoritative women leaders today. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but we are putting diversity on the agenda. We're in crazy times. We're emerging from the pandemic in most countries, and there is a mandate for change. We know that accountants fulfill very important roles in the economy, and they are standing in the gap with business owners and fencing off all the regulation and tax changes and so many things. So we've got four great leaders here to talk about diversity and change and culture and leadership and what's really working in the accounting world. So, Terry, I'm going to start with you. Would you give us a little introduction so our watchers and listeners know who you are? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Tamara Lorzell, and I'm a partner with Convergence Coaching. I'm located in just south of Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Twin Cities. And we have been providing leadership and coaching and strategic planning services for public accounting firms for 22 years in a remote and hybrid environment. So
that takes some doing. I'm almost tempted to ask you right out of the gate, Tamara, what's changed in 22 years? And probably some of the answer is not a whole lot, right?
Right. Well, I think the last 3 years escalated some change and saw that people can actually work anywhere, anytime. And we can talk more about that as we talk about diversity too, because I think that helps us in that area.
Definitely. The COVID pandemic has certainly been a catalyst for change. How much change we yet to see, but we'll talk about it. Lexi, lovely to have you with us. Please, an introduction from you.
Thank you, Rob. My name is Lexi Kessler. I am actually the managing partner-elect for Aronson. And effective January 1st, we're merging. I'm partnered with Aronson. We're merging in with Aprio, another firm that's will be a top 25 combined firm. They're headquartered out of Atlanta. I am based right outside of Washington, D.C. in Rockville, Maryland. And my role will be the regional managing partner or leader for the new combined firm.
Well, congratulations on that. And we interviewed a guy called Matt Snow. He's the chairman of Forbes. You will know,
yes.
Formerly GHD and BKD. And I went to visit him in Charlotte. My daughter's just started studying there at ECU. And so I sat down with Matt. And one of the things that came out from that is there are no firms too big to merge these days. So obviously, congratulations. That's the big merging of two very diverse cultures. So I'm sure that's going to be really interesting.
It feeds off of change.
Lots of change. Alexis, great to have you with us. Please, an introduction from you.
Sure. Thank you, Alexis Becker. I am a partner with Freed Maxick based in Buffalo, New York, and I am fortunate enough to lead our accounting and advisory practice, which really encompasses everything under the consulting umbrella, as well as, full outsourced accounting services. So thanks for having me here today, Rob.
Thank you. And Terry, welcome to you as well.
Thank you. I'm Terry Schaefer. I'm a partner with BDO, and I lead our Northeast Ohio assurance practices here locally. And appreciate the opportunity to chat with all of you and meet with all of you fantastic leaders as well today.
Well, let's kick off by inviting you to just make some opening remarks. And Alexis, I'll start with you on this, if I may. Diversity, equity, inclusion. We could add two more words there that have become popular. Justice and accessibility are also in the agenda. And it's things that perhaps we weren't talking about a few years ago, but they've really risen to the top of the agenda. So talk to us about why this is important and why workplaces need this.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, I think it's so interesting. The world has just changed. Social media and overall access to data and different cultural details has just changed so drastically, and is really challenging companies to recognize gaps in diversity of thought and how important it is. I think it's been sped up even more by the pandemic, talking about hybrid work, talking about remote work. People are now bringing their lives to work, right? We have little kids in the background, or we have a dog or a cat. And you're just starting to realize sometimes people have things going on at home that make you think about how they're reacting at work and just truly bringing their whole selves. And I think if you ask any business owner, what do they say their most valuable asset is? Whether it's manufacturing or professional services, they say people. People are the most valuable asset. So really making sure we're creating environments where individuals can thrive and bring their unique perspectives to the table on business issues will only continue to help produce stronger business outcomes. And I think the more we can bring those unique thoughts to the table, as we all know, teamwork is better than just having your one perspective. You come up with a more full answer to an issue and may see sides of the problem that as a team that you wouldn't see individually.
Lexi, why has DEI risen to the top of the agenda for you in your world?
Sure. I was actually making notes so I wouldn't forget my thoughts as Alexis was talking. So you got me there. I think it's a couple of things, actually. If you think about it, the conversation has been starting for a while. So I do think the conversation is beginning to take the next step in the evolution of where we need to get to. Because even in our internal councils, what should we title our council, right? We have a conversation now about, well, we got rid of equity. Well, we should probably put in belonging. Well, we should probably, put that back in. Why did you get rid of equity? So there's really a lot of dialogue that's starting to happen, which I think is very positive, right? This is because the more that we get the conversation out there on the table, the faster that we can get to where we want to go. I also do think that there's a business imperative. We've always talked about this business imperative, but our profession has a significant pipeline issue. And that business imperative is making us think differently, right? And so it's that with the pandemic, I think as I think it was Alexa said, it has really kicked us into the future. Or Tamara, I apologize. Who said it? One of you said it. I said it gave us a kick in the pants into the future, probably at least 5 years on where we need to function as an organization. So that business imperative piece, I think, has risen to the top. And we can talk later about some of the programs that are out there that are very exciting to see action beginning to happen to start to create that. So that's what I think's caused it.
And Terry, there is a need for strong female leadership. We'll talk perhaps about how men and women lead differently. Certainly women are known to have a more empathetic, compassionate, vulnerable style to their leadership than some men, but diversity of all kinds. Lexi said it there. There's a strong business case for it, isn't there? Any other reasons for you why it's important?
Well, from the leadership angle, what I've observed over the years, and I think dating way back to the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus book, women tend to think through problems out loud. We collaborate. We don't necessarily want you to solve them today, but we think about things in terms of a global picture and all the impact, where not all, but many men tend to compartmentalize. We will fix problem A, but then there's a ripple effect. So I do think, and I appreciate both sides of the house, so to be clear, but I do think there's a value in how different types of personalities think through problem solving. And having more voices at the table definitely gets us to a better long-term solution. And just to double back on what Lexi and Alexis both just talked about, we have if you look at it demographically, women are outpacing men in terms of coming into college. If we don't somehow have a pathway and mentorship and a pipeline to getting greater diversity in leadership, we're going to lose that talent war as an overall industry, or just professionally thinking in the workforce in totality. And I do think COVID impacted that greatly, because when we had children at home and they were homeschooling and we were trying to navigate those waters, we saw a drop on professional leaders, women in leadership roles stepping aside to prioritize home. So we do need to figure this out. And Lexi, absolutely, that imperative became that much more demonstrated during the pandemic.
Just actually share one quick statistic. The World Economic Forum predicts that the pandemic has set gender equality back by an additional 36 years. So that's spot on because of the pandemic.
Goodness me. I'm intrigued as to the drivers of that. Well, we do know 53% of accountants in the world are women, but they are chronically underrepresented in leadership roles. So that's the backdrop. Tamara, I'm going to let you loose on this now, because I know you won't hold back. And you're in a unique position in a consulting role where you talk to a number of firms rather than being sat at the top of one. So what's your view on all of this as we open things up?
Well, so I think this access, you said like that word has been added, access and justice, I think is important for us to look at with this pipeline shortage that everybody's been talking about here. And it's how do we create access for those leadership roles for women, for underrepresented groups, that is not the traditional way that maybe historically men in our profession have progressed. I think that's one of the barriers that still exists. And Terry, I agree 100%. I think the pandemic, we saw that women are still the primary caregivers at home. Yes. Their number one role. And if I'm not winning at home, I am not going to pick work over that. where the opposite tends to be true, and those differences you were talking about, that, men still will pick their career first, and often will have, their wife or spouse or, partner that is supporting at home. And so we have to figure out, what are the structures, what are the barriers that are in place that prevent women from feeling like I can have both, like a man can have both. And so I think that is something that we have to really, dissect and tear down and figure out, new ways of, building careers in accounting.
One of the things that's come out from the panels that we've done is the need for a competitive advantage, and how difficult firms find it to differentiate themselves, not just in the client marketplace, but in the talent marketplace and employer brand. And when we talk about diversity of people, we also mean diversity of thought, don't we? The ability to innovate, the ability to present something different, the ability to showcase a career path for females, say, that other firms may not do, given there's so many of them out there. Alexis, you're nodding at that one.
Yeah. And I really, Tamara, thinking through what you just said as well, I think this is a wonderful opportunity for this profession to really highlight what a wonderful environment we could create for men or women, right, who do want to put their family first. If you're in a private industry job, you're doing your job and you need to be there to do the job. You don't have peers who are your level and have your skill set that you can lean on. God forbid something happened to me, I can lean on one of my partners and say, I need you to step in, I need you to help me. And you have collaboration, as well as from a career perspective, each path is different, right? There's a path to partner in each firm, but mine may be different than what Terry's was, or Lexi, what yours was, and that's okay, and that's amazing. And not all jobs can offer that. I think it's really such an opportunity for us as CPAs to be out there and really advocating for ourselves differently. And what a wonderful profession this is for women and men alike, who really want to put their lives first, but do want a very meaningful career and know they can be challenged and know they can contribute value to their clients' businesses.
And part of the talent problem is that there are people leaving accounting roles to go into industry, to go into fintech. They look at, well, we call it private practice here in the UK. You call it public accounting now. We're chartered, you're CPA. They're saying, I don't want this anymore. I don't want to be tied to a desk for 10 to 15 years in the hope of making partner and going down the equity model. So things are definitely changing. So we've set the scene here. Any final remarks from any of you as we move on to talking about the need for change as the backdrop for this conversation?
Yeah, I do think that there is. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Lexi. No, go ahead. Go.
I think that there is a beginning of a shift, though, with this next generation. If there weren't, why would we put in so many paternity leave policies now? Right. So I do think it may take a little bit, but I do see the tide turning, and how I kind of want to brag a little bit. I think that women created this movement, so to movement isn't quite the right word, but a business imperative need to have this flexibility for a family. As we raised our children, and as our children are entering the marketplace, our sons want to have that same flexibility in the marketplace. So I do see that is beginning to shift, and I feel like we're trendsetters. That's what we are.
Tamara?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I love all of that, Lexi. And I think that's, Alexis, what you said is this, there is no better time to be in accounting and to be a CPA. And you can create so many roles that have not existed before. And looking and seeing what the need is and how you can uniquely contribute to that need to create those roles, now is the time. And there's many firms and many firm leaders that are change ready and open to that. And when you find those, then you can create a career path. You can create a way to contribute to the firm that maybe wasn't even thought of or invented before. So I just, as a backdrop, Rob, I would just add that.
So let's move on and talk about the need for change. Certainly, accounting as a profession is not known for its agility, its adaptability. It's been ever thus for thousands of years, it would appear. And with a business model with monthly, annual, recurring fees, there's not a lot of incentive beyond legal and regulatory change for accountants to differ on any course of action. So let me start with you on this one, Lexi. What needs to change in the accounting profession to make things like diversity, inclusion non-issues, do you think?
Well, I think I do believe accountants do a checklist. So you can hire. It's the inclusion piece that we struggle with, right, as a profession. And I think that some of the things, it's also, somebody had touched on this earlier as well, the program that Center for Audit Quality has put out there about the Accounting Plus program, where it is actually doing a social media campaign to reach students that are in high school, specifically targeting underserved communities, because underserved communities, they may not even know what a CPA is because they don't have somebody in their family that is that. They may not even know that that's a possibility for a profession. So I think that there's a significant awareness that needs to happen for people to even know it's a possibility for them.
And Terry, there are barriers that need to be broken down out there that provokes change.
And I was just taking some notes, Lexi, following your lead there. But I think
You've got a great panel when the panel members are taking notes from each other. That's wonderful.
Right.
But I do think one of the big barriers is mentorship, and I don't use that lightly. I know in our firm, the observation I had probably 5 or 6 years ago is that when we hired, let's say, a young man who was a manager, senior manager, when he looked to a mentor, he went to our then managing partner for a mentor. He went to the lead partner. If you hired a woman in the same capacity, she looked one level above. And she looked to a person who was just like herself, right? Maybe I have new babies at home, or I'm balancing 2 careers at home, where when I took that step back, I started advising the younger women that I work with to go to the leader. There's no reason that you have to have a formal mentor that's somebody who's just like you. So learn how to break down barriers from a mentor, somebody who's outside of the one who looks and feels and talks just like you. And I think we have to look at mentorship and have to look at career development with a diverse lens as well. So I think that's one big barrier. And I think the continued flexibility. I mean, women in the workforce, men in the workforce too. The goal, Lexi, is that flexibility. What do we do to make this more attractive? How does compensation need to change? We're losing talent on many levels because of our compensation models and the way firms tend to run. So I think those are some barriers, because if I have the choice between paying daycare or childcare and that cost versus a reduced workload, how do I balance the pro and con of that in my decision and in my career growth? So we need to look at this differently going forward.
Yeah. Tamara, what do you feel are some of the barriers that need to be overcome, particularly for underrepresented groups like women?
Well, so I have kind of an interesting twist on that. I think one of the barriers for change right now is that we're making good money. So why change?
Great point.
Why change?
Great point.
Yeah.
I don't need to change. And so I think that creates a barrier for our future generations, or like Lexi, you said, for others to even see the possibility of accounting as a profession I could step into. And so it's one of the things that, we have really been strongly encouraging current leaders to step back or step aside and say, what does that next gen want in their firms as they're building it? What kind of clients do they want to serve? How do they want to do it? What does this hybrid model look like? What are the career paths that we're looking for? What is the technology that we should be implementing and utilizing? Moving away from timesheets that are constraining us in our metrics and how we measure people, how we price and bill. I could get on a soapbox. You said soapbox, Rob. I could get on a soapbox about that. But so I think one of the barriers is we're making good money. And I know that kind of sounds odd, like, well, that's a good thing, right? Yes, it's a great thing. But I think it prevents us in some cases from making the needed changes for the future of the firm and the future of the profession.
Well, who are the barriers to change in accounting firms? It's generally the senior partners with big equity in the firm and big payouts coming, and they're old and they're baby boomers. And what price change for them? It affects their payout. So if we were being brutally honest, they're not going to make a mandate for change, are they?
Right. Now, if we're generous leaders, that's one of the leadership attributes that we just strongly encourage and talk about is generosity as a core leadership value versus my selfish interest, which is what you were just pointing to, Rob. I have to set aside that selfish interest for what I'm going to say greater good, right? But also the legacy, the continuity, the future. of the firm. And it's a tricky balance, right? The equity leaders have put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and time, and had, good years and bad years, and the recession in 2007, 8, right? The whole list. But we also need to say, all right, that was yesterday. Looking forward,
Yes.
what do we need to do?
There's so much coming out here. I'm tempted to ask, who runs a firm? Is it the managing partner or the senior partners with the big equity investments? We could also ask the question, is there a need for a more corporate business model with a C-suite and not what we've got right now? But we're straight enough to ask a little bit. Terry, what are the barriers for change as far as you can see?
I do think that the biggest barrier for change is I'm fortunate, right? I've been blessed with firms, to your point, that really had a very inclusive culture with them throughout my career. So I feel like there's a willingness to change in leadership. I really do, and to get more diversity at the table, but without the right mentoring towards that outcome, without the leaders who truly take the step back and have those little tidbits that keep a woman engaged and see a path, you can't get there, right? It's very easy for a woman to opt and prioritize the personal life versus the long-term career path without that leader in front of them who's kind of pulling them along. So I keep coming back to mentorship and accessibility, Tamara, to your point.
Yeah.
And sponsorship.
Well,
Yes.
Alexis, I've been holding you back on this one, but talk to us about some of the barriers.
And really, and I'll add on to what Terry said, is just in sponsorship, right? You can't have too many mentors. I think in public accounting, we always have a pretty structured mentorship program, but that doesn't mean that's your only mentor. Encouraging our staff to have people outside of public accounting, I think, is just as important, and making those introductions for them, and then sponsoring them, help pull them up, I love what Terry said about, the females pick one level above and the males go to the managing partner. I think that is something I'd never really thought about before, but is very, very relevant. And another barrier, I unfortunately think there's still a pretty significant educational gap on what DEI is and why it's important. I see it more geographically here in Buffalo. I lived in Cincinnati for a long time. I think this is a very different area. It's a very, very strong community. The staff we have here are absolutely incredible. But there's definitely a different sense of just DEI even being understood. Are people inclusive? Are they kind? Yes. But it is still in the bias definition, not really in true DEI. This is why we need it. And I think that's scary for some of our partners of, wait a minute, why do I need this? How am I going to pitch it to my other partners? Nonetheless, pitch it internally. But if you break it down, the actions we're taking are totally on a DEI path. It's not it's almost explaining, but we're already doing these things and this is what we mean, and being more direct and articulate and taking the time to communicate those things. And this is what it is. This is why we're doing it. I think it's just as important, at least within our firm, especially.
And it's helping to not make it.
Why change is so glacial, given that if you asked 100 partners in an accounting firm what DEI is, you get 101 different answers. So as much as we're talking about it, there isn't a clear vocabulary for it. There isn't anyone with an authoritative voice about it that can say this is right. We're all in different firms with different cultures and different people and different weapons and different climates and everything else. So any final thoughts on the agenda, the barriers to change, and the burning platform perhaps that might be DEI?
Can I just one question? It's almost a question back to the panel. Is there an element of, I think BDO has done a fantastic job, I will say that, at the forefront of really making DEI prominent, right? We have a multicultural alliance. Every month we're honoring some aspect. But when you think about the traditional paths for growth, development, sponsorship, it doesn't lend itself to DEI. So is there a threat there to the traditional way, of the way it's always been done, that now we're addressing head on? And so there's that natural tension and resistance. I think that's a very real part.
I think that's spot on. I think there is. And I think that part of it is also getting to the generous leadership comment you made, Tamara, earlier, right? It's an inclusive piece of it. The way that you make change happen is by including your people. It's not all on your shoulders. And I think that there is a tendency from a generation, I tend to be like that, like, oh, I'm responsible for this, I need to do it. It's like, no, include other people. You don't have to be the one doing all of it. And that is a mindset shift on it. But
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
that's that advocacy, Lexi, is, experiential opportunities, those learning opportunities is so important. And Alexis, I was thinking the exact same thing when you were saying definition, like we just need to do so much more educating on DE&I. And part of that education is hearing people's stories. I know a firm and they've done a great job of having different groups represent, either their ethnic background or the LGBTQ community and the terminology, pronouns, learning, why that's important. What's different from women and men, at home and, child rearing or responsibilities. What does that look like? And men do want paternity, but listening to people's stories is, I think, a big part of that education. And if we could take the time to do that and share that and be generous, and vulnerable, sharing those stories, because it takes courage in some cases to share people's stories.
Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent point.
There is a case to be made that accounting has a problem with its image as a profession. We're not talking about other sectors here, but I read a statistic recently that said there are more people leaving accounting and dying and retiring and moving on than there are coming in. And why would a graduate look at an accounting degree for a $60,000, $70,000 a year salary when they can do a legal degree and double that? So are there any brand problems with accounting as a profession? We talk about how exciting it is, but still, it is what it is.
Yes, and I can speak to that just a little bit I'm new to the AICPA board, and I know that there are some initiatives that aren't out there yet, but that are being explored to try to address that. Right. And as I mentioned earlier, that Center for Audit Quality, I thought was a great pilot program of really changing the image of what an accountant is. What does an accountant look like? But there's no question that there is something that has to be figured out between the 150 requirement, which can't go away. It just can't. As much as we would like it to, it's too embedded. It would take too much, and it's not going to fix what we're dealing with now.
But even
so
the CPA
I think
qualification,
it is about a branding thing.
Even the CPA qualification or the chartered accountant qualification, is that fit for purpose? Do we talk enough about technology? Do we talk enough about soft skills and leadership skills in the accounting qualification, or is it double entry bookkeeping? And I'm part qualified as an accountant, but I'm a former high school math teacher, and I know that I gave up teaching because I was teaching kids things that weren't relevant in real life.
Yeah, I don't think we give ourselves
theorem and right angle triangles and algebra that they don't really use. So it's got to make it fit for purpose. Alex, if you've got a thought on that.
I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for all that we do and all that we learn every day. I came to Freed at the end of 2020, had spent most of my career in public accounting, but did a 5-year stint at a private company. And I think it opened my eyes to all sorts of things that I took for granted, because a lot of us who had made partner in our firm had stayed, right? We didn't really jump around between different companies. We really were in this firm and we have our perspective, and people pay us to be experts. So we expect to be experts. We have to be, we have to be on, we have to know the answer or find the answer. And I just think we're living in a very different world where you can't possibly be the expert of everything, and you need to collaborate, and we are set up to collaborate. We just need to give ourselves permission to do that. Not let the timesheet be a barrier to that. But I think it's really, really important that we also give ourselves credit and start marketing ourselves differently for all that you learn with this career. Because I just don't know that we do that. We take it for granted that our self-worth is in that CPA title, when, I'll take my dad's words of, your friends know what that means. Not everybody knows what that means and how important it is. Everyone puts that as tax, and that's just not all it is. So just, helping advocate for the profession, I think is called for.
And getting in front of the students, speaking to them about the profession, where they're like, we're starting at community colleges now, and we're even getting some partners at the high schools, going into the high schools to talk about what it's about.
Yeah, we're doing that here as well.
There's multiple prongs to this. Yeah.
I think too, and part of reaching out to the students, I have 4 children, right? So my youngest 2 are maybe 16 and 19. My oldest 2 are closer to 30. And making what I do glamorous to them is a little bit tricky, but telling that story of what makes what we do important. And we have a partner here who says, look, we are the guardians of the public trust. That's our job. And when you put it that way, that sounds way more interesting than saying I'm an auditor.
Right.
And I think recent events that have hit the news, how could FTX have been prevented? And you go back to the Enron, the WorldCom, the far more frauds. I mean, it's not our job necessarily to prevent fraud, but it is our job to be there protecting the investor and protecting that group. And what does that mean? So adding a little bit of the glamour and the excitement for what we do, because as a college student, all I'll see are my first 2 years out, right? And I'm just going to be grinding 14 hours a day. And that's not it. There's a better story. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think professionally, and Alexis, you said it, we don't necessarily value what we do to the market. As a profession, we've undercut each other just to gain new work instead of protecting our position to say, no, this is why we are the value that we are. And that's compromised our starting salaries relative to our finance fintech peers. And that's jeopardized that pipeline.
Well, let's not dwell too much because we're putting a lot of wrongs right in the accounting profession generally, but we're talking about diversity. Let's move on to Tamara. Did you have a quick point you wanted to make there?
I would just, I agree with everything that was said. I would just look at it from a different angle, and that's the business model shifts that we need to make in accounting to make it more appealing to our young talent coming out of school. And, looking at how we're, solving the capacity, getting creative about staffing, not requiring CPAs for everything that we're doing, looking at that hours model. And I love the idea of being guardians, Terry. I love that story. But the business model is the place I would also look. There's a whole bunch of different ways we should measuring success and metrics, and we could have a whole conversation of that. But I think that is adding to our branding, challenge, as well as the story that we also need to be telling.
Let's talk about leadership. You've all had interesting journeys. You've learned from mentors and people along the way. You've probably had negative role models. My father was an alcoholic, and I disowned him when I was 18. He was a former Green Beret Marine and had an accident in the Antarctic and came out and couldn't adapt to civilian life. And I'm on the record with this. But he was a lousy father. He's passed on now. But I'd like to think I'm a good father by doing everything that he didn't. So we do have these negative role models as well. So Terry, I'll start with you on this one. What shaped your leadership approach, and do you think men lead differently to women?
I do think men lead differently to women. I do think women fundamentally have that just nurturing aspect to how we grow and identify issues. And again, like I said earlier, I think women tend to think out loud, which helps you be an effective leader. But what's interesting is what shaped my development were male leaders. So I had the great fortune of a few male leaders who were supporting their wives' career growth and development. And Alexis is nodding because we had the same mentor, but they were able to empathize with my challenges as I evolved. And yet at the same time, they were able to instill in me what it takes to be an effective leader and to lead men. So I've had the great fortune of having a kind of a gender blind career development, but I do think there's those fundamental differences. And I'll say the only other aspect, I once heard a speaker who said, you can have it all, but you have to define what your all is. And I think that helped shape me. That was probably mid-level of my career, helped shape me to think about what is it that's my all, and how do I get there? And then that's what I in turn turn around and repeat with the folks around me.
Alexis, I know you're relating a lot to what Terry's saying. I'm just thinking in the complex world that we live in, fragile humans, mental well-being, hybrid working, the leaders of old can't cope with a workforce like that, can they?
I think they can if they're willing to be vulnerable. I think, that word's been used in this panel before, and I think it should be emphasized. I think regardless of, male or female, I think if we're all willing to be vulnerable and bring our whole selves to work and be that model, I think another important statement is we're all leaders, right? So I tell my staff that on my team, I don't care if you're the intern, you're still a leader in your own way, and you're responsible for how you act and how you hold yourselves with clients and at work and with others. And when you need help, you need to speak up. I mean, that's just as important as us being leaders and being that role model. I, very much relate to what Terry says. And, Terry was one of my mentors, and I'm thankful for her to help me through a lot of things as I was growing and developing. Women are definitely more empathetic, and I value that. And I think what I've learned over the past 5 to 10 years is while men may not be as empathetic, they're also not enablers. So how can we as women be empathetic while not enabling, right? So teach coping skills versus explain away a problem, right? How can we be there in such a way that we are enabling all those leaders below us to be the best leader they can be, again, in their own unique way that makes the most sense for them, not necessarily fitting into this lane or this lane or this lane, but just for that unique individual.
And Tamara, you speak a lot in your role at Convergence about leading in complex cultures and hybrid working environments, and I'm sure you deal with fragility and mental resilience too. What does good leadership look like for you?
Well, you were asking about what's the difference between men and women, and I think women are more relational and men tend to be more transactional. And I think that's been one of the hurdles, if you will, this quick pivot we made to remote in March of 2020 is how do I nurture my team? How do I know what's going on? How do I tether them, to me, to our organization in this hybrid environment? And I think it's that learning about your people, knowing them. Terry, I love that having it all. We say having it all. Sometimes I'm having too much of it all, but defining what it is for each individual. I should know that every single individual in our organization needs to have, we would say, a shepherd, a career advisor, coach, mentor, whatever term you want to use. And you should be able to tell me, what is going on in their life? What is having it all look like for them? And how do we make that all work, the holistic human being work? And getting really comfortable with technology like this, podcasts, video, in person, where appropriate and where we can. But I can build those relationships. I can know my people. I can tether them to me no matter when and where and how we're working together. So I think that's critical in leadership.
I'm just smiling to myself thinking, it's okay having it all, but where do you put it?
Right.
You can't keep it in your house. Yeah, you started something there, Terry.
It starts leaking out, right, Terry? I mean, having it all starts leaking it out.
It does.
Lexi, talk to us about what good leaders look like in today's crazy world.
I think that good leaders used to be where it was just within your company, right? And one of the things several years ago that I learned was I went outside of the walls of my firm. That's what I call it. And I encourage others to do that. I think if you go outside the walls of the firm, you get differences, the diversity. How do people think differently? How do you see, well, it's not just how we do it. This is really where the profession is going. This is where the world is going. Get your head off your desk and go out there and just meet people. And I think it's connecting our next generation with those individuals that can help them to see differently. And then they can formulate what they think, they can learn from different people and then pick what works for them. So I think leadership isn't just one-stop shop anymore. I think it needs to be multiple people, multiple places for people to really create who they want to be. And I think this next generation needs that because they'll come out of school and they're starting audit and they're like, this isn't what I want to do, and I want to leave and go someplace else. That's part of what prompted our merger, was that we have more ability for them to come in and say, I want to do this or I want to do that. That's that same concept. So I think having the ability from a leader perspective, don't be offended if you're not the only one they look to, right? Yeah. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right? So
vulnerabilities come up in this conversation. Men are not encouraged to show vulnerability. You show weakness on the playground, guess what? You get beaten up.
Yeah.
You get bullied.
Yeah.
So men have that mentality. The British call it the stiff upper lip, but not showing any weaknesses, not showing any vulnerabilities. And that can help you when you're leading a strong firm and everything's going well. But I've also heard stories from men that said, when I wasn't coping, there was nobody I could turn to. I couldn't admit to a weakness. I couldn't admit that I was struggling.
Right.
One guy I interviewed tried to take his own life because he'd backed himself into such a hole. And unlike many women, he had nobody to confide in.
Wow.
And that presented a real struggle. So you're right, women do talk. They are happy to be vulnerable and share some weaknesses because they know they can lean into a strong network of other females in a way that perhaps men don't have. I mean, I'm stereotyping here, of course, but as much as you're saying, I've learned from some great male leaders. There are things to be said on both sides. Any thoughts?
There absolutely are. There absolutely is. And I think that I always joke around, use this for those Maxwell smart people, the cone of secret silence. You find men or women where we get under the cone and we can have a conversation that stays with just us, people that you can trust in friendships. I affectionately call them work husbands, even the wife calls me the work wife, because you trust that person, that you can have vice versa, that they can share with you. But some, I will say, when the men tend to be a little bit more close to the chest. It takes a while, and you can get a window. It's kind of raising your children. You get a window and you grab that window. When they get older, you stop what you're doing and you listen, right? Because you're going to get more insight to be able to be a stronger team together too. So
I just want to throw a question. Sorry, Tamara, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say vulnerability actually makes us stronger leaders.
Yeah.
And I don't think we often think about it like that, but I can't be superhuman and then expect other people to see me. I want them to view me as superhuman and perfect and have all the answers and have it all together all of the time. That's not attainable.
That's intimidating, isn't it?
It's completely intimidating. And Lexi was saying, we got to look at other leaders and other role models, right? If I look at that role model, it's like, I can't attain that. So I'm not going to try. We talked about the branding image. Instead, here's where I'm doing well, here's where I might be off. Sharing how I got through that, using the support, I think is critical. And we need to encourage that to be able to, say, how do we move through these different phases, either in my life, in my career, in our market, whatever might be going on. And there are ups and downs, and that's okay. That's part of the journey.
Yeah, one of my male, sorry.
Go ahead, Alexis.
Yeah, one of my male mentors even said, you got to let the balls fall out of there sometimes. It's okay to fail. And I was like, I can't do that. But when you do it, it does instigate change, because people don't look at you as you failed. It was what happened. Why did the balls fall? And what do we need to change so they don't fall again? It was never about a person. So just helping coach through those things, right? That safe space to fail. It is okay. It's okay to admit it, because we all learn together when we're open and we communicate.
Well, you mentioned balls, Alexis, so I'm going to jump in here. The traditional male way of nurturing their staff is to say, grow a pair, or man up, or pull yourself together. And we do lack that empathy. I'm preaching to myself here. And men in a mentally fragile world where everybody's contending with something, it's very difficult for a lot of men to understand where women or other underrepresented groups are coming from. And with such a diverse workforce that we need to nurture through, if you've got a hammer, as a lot of men hold, to solve a problem, everything's that nail. So maybe that diverse leadership is exactly what we need to navigate these murky waters.
Well, I think there's a place for both. We're a women-owned business, and also our current team of 11 is all women. But we also we run a little bit, with no drama allowed. I love the enabling, Alexis. It's like, we got to pull it together and have compassion for what's been going on in people's lives. I had surgery this year. Another partner of mine had surgery this year. We had a maternity leave this year. We've had, different things happen, 2 moves, house moves. How do we manage through all of that without that iron fist? And we need to keep things progressing and moving. And so I think it's finding that balance, that's so critical.
Lexi, were you going to add a thought there?
Yeah, I was going to say that people need that flexibility, whatever, but let's stay focused on what the end goal is. Right. We still have to deliver something. One of the easiest, simplest examples I've used with people, like, we still have a job to do. We still have to deliver these things to our clients. I had when I was a manager a long time ago, this group, it was an audit that was near the beach, and they had a group beach house, and they wanted to take off early on Friday. So this was not really what you did back then. and head out. And I said, that's fine if you get the job done by noon on Friday.
Right.
I said, that's perfect. So it created the expectation, right? And this is a very simple, dumbed down example of what.
And I'm sure they got it done.
You're trying to say. They did, yeah. And enjoyed their weekend at the beach.
Yeah.
So it's more of like, but when life events do come up, it is needing you. I mean, I've been on both sides of that. And sadly, the past 3 years have been very difficult personally. But I had this amazing team that got me through it. And it made me really open my eyes to so much. You know, there's silver linings whenever you go through anything that's difficult, but it is having that and that focus of we still need to get this to the client, regardless of what happens in life. Do you know what I mean? And having that mindset and seeing in action is very powerful.
Terry?
I love the iron fist wording, because I look at it, and Tamara, you went through a list of everything your organization has been through. And I always tell our team, you know, I had some personal challenges as well in the last couple of years, but everybody has something. So let's figure out what everybody's something is, and then let's come together and solve it and communicate. So I think
get through it.
And it's not about being tough and gritting your teeth and just driving through it and keeping that on a shelf somewhere else. But Alexis, you said it, bring your whole person. Let's communicate. Let's lead. Let's not enable. There's still accountability, and let's get it done.
We'll have each other's backs when we need it, right?
Yep,
like
absolutely.
having that sense of community with your team of I'll support you in your time of need, and then you'll be there for me when I need it. And it doesn't all weigh on just you.
Yeah, right.
And when people when your team sees your leaders doing that, that changes a culture. Right?
It does.
Let's pick up men for just a moment, though, because we know that most Fortune 500 CEOs are men. In the UK, most FTSE 100 leaders are men, and men are very single-minded when it comes to driving a big corporate organization, and there's a cost to be paid for that. Steve Jobs, you take Steve Jobs as an example. He was well known for being very difficult to deal with and very dismissive and brusque with his employees. This is on the record. And when asked about this, people adored him, but they didn't necessarily like him. But when asked about this, he said, it's just because I want the thing that we're working on to be better. And he was just go away and make that memory twice as big in half the size. And no empathy about that, no bedside manner, as we would say about surgeons and doctors. But by goodness, he got the job done. So there is sometimes a need for leaders like that to hold the line and point to true north, and all the softer stuff we might say is done by people around him.
It's accountability.
Yeah. So
that hasn't changed. That still needs to be there.
Yeah. So let's wrap things up, ladies, and move to a close and get from you a few practical tips that our audience might take away. You can aim this at women or leaders generally. I had one of you say that we're all leaders, and they say even the most introverted person in the world will influence 10,000 people in their lifetime. So we totally agree with that. So we're all leaders or leaders in the making. But for people who do want to lead better or promote a more diverse culture and a more inclusive working environment, let's start with you, Alexis, on this one. What words of practical encouragement would you give to our audience today?
I would just say be easier on yourself, right? Not every box needs to be checked at all times. I think women are often better leaders than they give themselves credit for, and men are often give themselves more credit than they are, the quality of leader they are. So just, make sure you speak up when you need it, set realistic expectations, and just know what your definition of success is, because it's not the same as somebody else's. Don't use somebody else as your barometer.
That's very wise. I'm just thinking, most men think they're great drivers, above average drivers. Now, most men can't be great drivers because by the law of averages, but men have a really high opinion of their own driving, and perhaps the same in their own leadership, that they think, I'm such a great leader, I have nothing to worry about. So yeah. Anything else from you, Alexis, on what it takes to lead well in today's crazy world?
I think just, allowing yourself to be thoughtful of those you're leading, knowing that if someone's having a bad day, they may be having a bad day for something that they're not willing to share, and that's okay. But again, drive that accountability and help them get back on their path. So
I'd perhaps add to that, from listening to many women doing these panels, that to be that kind of leader that will listen to people talking about having a bad day, you've got to be the kind of leader that people will admit to you that they are having a bad day. You've got to be approachable. You've got to not have the kind of reaction which makes them think, I wish I hadn't have told him or her that. And that's a softer kind of leader that is perhaps a bit more vulnerable, as we've been speaking about. You'd go along with that, Alexis, wouldn't you?
Yeah, very much more servant leadership. I think that has to be where we're all headed. Honestly, I don't think you could be the type of leader anymore that has that iron fist and people are afraid of. I don't think you're inspiring people the way they need to be inspired to do the job you need them to do.
Terry, what would you tell people in closing?
Just be self-aware. You know, you have to be aware of your own actions. To Alexis, to your point, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be that person who they're comfortable confiding in. And there's times when you hold yourself accountable to a way that makes other people uncomfortable. There's mannerisms, reactions that you have that set up those walls very quickly around someone else. So self-awareness is key. We talked about balls earlier, but you know, someone said, how do you juggle? I don't juggle. All the balls are on the floor. I'm going to continuously pick up the one that's the highest priority. So be self-aware, prioritize your days. And if you're not healthy, if you're not mentally in the right place, you can't be that leader for anybody else. And I do think, particularly as women, we put our own health, our own person, subordinate to the whole world around us. And every now and then you have to take that step back and reset and be self-aware enough to know when that is.
Yeah. You just put in mind another question, Terry, then I'm going to ask you all before we finish, which is how you recharge your batteries. Yes, self-care. You've got to get yourself right. You've got to keep your own batteries filled up before you have the energy capacity to lead others. So just have a few answers ready for that as I come round. But let's finish this off. Lexi, what would be your call to arms for our audience here to take away?
So what has helped me tremendously, especially with the pandemic, is where are my places of empowerment? Where do I go to that helps me to take a step back and get energized again? And from a professional perspective and personal, but from professional for me, it's been externally. It's been AICPA, the Maryland State Societies. When I'm around real thought leaders and people that are thinking about the bigger picture, I get clarity and it helps me to deal with the minutia I've been in that's been pulling me down. So that really helps significantly. And I also think that there's a big difference between listening and hearing as a leader. And you need to be present when somebody is discussing a problem with you and hear what they are saying. I think that's critical.
And to do that, you've got to ask good questions too, haven't you? Because not all responses come out. You've got to tease them and ease them out of there, don't you?
You do. And the other hard part is that we have so many things coming at us, like fire hoses, you know, whether it's the phone, it's the instant messaging on your laptop while you're on a panel, whatever it is. And clearing your head is not an easy thing to do, to be present for that conversation. It's a challenge. I'm just saying I know it needs to happen. That's all.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. Tamara, we started with you and we'll end with you on this one. What's your warrior call to the people watching and listening?
Well, and I would build on what you two were just discussing, this idea of listening and asking good questions. I think, you know, leaders today and into the future need to be curious and interested and go deeper. I think, you know, the volume you were just talking about and, you know, all the different communications, Lexi, and being pinged while we're doing this, we get really transactional instead of pausing and finding out what's really going on, whether it's a personal matter or a business owner is having, you know, some challenges or they have some huge aspirations for 2023, that I'm pausing to listen, but ask more questions, be curious, be interested. That demonstrates care. That also demonstrates, you know, my interest and, you know, how I can help you. And maybe I can't directly, but that team approach, Alexis, you were talking about, it might be in my organization or outside my organization. What kind of resources and tools and support can I provide for my employees, for my talent, and for my clients? And I think that curiosity and interest and care and concern, genuine care and concern, and we have to take the time to do that and not just move on to the next thing.
Genuine caring, concern, and time are two things I haven't got as a man. I'm really struggling and challenged by that message. So, but you're absolutely right, Tamara. It's what's required these days. Let's finish with a quick fire round. And Terry, I'll come to you again on this one. How do you recharge? How do you re-energize? Lexi's given a little example, but you need filling up. Somebody needs to pour into your life so that you can then do that for your team. So how do you do it?
I'm a natural introvert. So for me to recharge means shutting everybody else down.
Right.
So I need that time alone. I need to focus and be centered. I'm personally a faith-based person. So my time on the weekend to be deep in thought, whether it's prayer or surrounding myself with those peers, helps me refocus and just shutting out the noise, even if it's an hour, right? And just being alone is what I sometimes need to clear the fog. And that's alone from everybody. That's alone from my husband.
Yeah.
It's alone from my kids. It's alone from the phone. It's alone.
Yeah.
It's not a highbrow. Yeah. It's not a highbrow response, Rob. It's just, that's me.
I totally get that. I'm committed Christian too. And having God in your life, just to see that as much as you're contending with this, someone else that's got it all in the palm of his hand is a very peaceful thought. I'm just thinking of the word introvert, extrovert, and many of us are situational extroverts in that when we're leading, we can turn it on if we want to. We can address an audience, we can empower a team, we can rile up a crowd. But when you ask us how we recharge, we want to be alone. We need some downtime. We need to get away from all of that. That's how we recharge. Tamara, how would you keep the shopping basket full, as we say here in the UK?
Well, two things. One, like on a daily and weekly basis, I think exercise and being outdoors, for me, I belong to a running group and it's a group of women. It's Moms on the Run, and they recharge me, and being outside and, just getting movement is huge for me. Longer term, sitting on a beach for a week. So that completely recharges me, the sunshine, the sand, the sea. And so looking at long-term charge, like that's my go-to.
Yeah. What was the name of your group again?
Moms on the Run.
Moms on the Run.
Love that.
Dan Stanley, who I mentioned earlier, we're doing a couple of shows with him, has a movement called Men and Mountains. He's based in Wales, and he takes 30, 40 men up a mountain for a few miles once a month, and they talk. So it's a great way of doing it.
It's awesome.
Lexi, how do you refill the fuel tank?
So from a quicker perspective, I love to cook and bake, because I have to focus on what I'm doing, what I'm decorating, whatever it is I'm doing. I have to clear my head. So that gets the noise out of my head for a little bit. Longer term, I love to see different cultures and the like. So traveling, and I love, what really helps is I've noticed if I go to a foreign country with a longer time zone difference, I really disconnect, because I have to focus on where am I going? What am I ordering for my meal? It forces me to clear my head. And you're in a phenomenal place usually that you enjoy. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. And as a leader, we're not just carrying our own problems, but everyone else's a lot of the time. So that disconnecting, very, very important. Alexis, what about you? What's your secret?
Yep. So I swim because I have found that in the pool, no one can talk to me. I don't have a device. I can just do my laps and kind of clear my head, let it all out. Sometimes if I'm struggling through a problem, it gives me the clarity I need to see it from a different angle. And then, same as Lexi, we love to travel, but our skiing is our passion. So making sure we get out west once a year, and just, again, being outside where I can't reach for that phone, and spending time, honestly, as silly as it sounds, on the chairlift with my kids uninterrupted, really, really helps. And it helps to see the world through their eyes.
Well, this has been phenomenal. Thank you all so much for your vulnerability and your passion and your insights today. It's been a wonderful conversation. We've covered so much, and we hope that watchers and listeners will gain a few gems of wisdom and words of encouragement from everything that you've shared today. Thank you so much.